The morning sun stretched softly over Maple Ridge, a quiet little town where time always seemed to move slower. Evelyn Parker stood in her kitchen watching the golden light spill across her garden through the window. Her hands cupped a steaming mug of tea, and the soft hum of a kettle still echoed faintly behind her. The air smelled like early spring damp soil, lilacs, and the faint sweetness of blooming roses. She took a sip, her eyes falling on the old wooden fence that lined the back of her garden. It was leaning just a little like an old man who'd carried too many years. The paint had chipped away in places. The once bright white now faded to gray. Evelyn sighed. That fence had stood there since the day her husband George built it with his bare hands nearly 30 years ago. Every plank had been hammered in with laughter, patience, and love. Now it stood as a quiet reminder of time, weather, and loss. George had been gone for almost 6 years. Sometimes it still didn't feel real. The mornings were the hardest when the house was silent and the sun came up without his soft voice greeting her. She missed the way he used to hum old country tunes while fixing things around the yard. He was always fixing something: the mailbox, the shed, the old swing set. That fence was his favorite project. He'd said once, "A strong fence keeps the garden safe, Eve, but love's what keeps the heart strong." She smiled faintly at the memory and pressed her hand against the window glass. It felt cool under her skin. The fence might have been broken, but what it represented, his love, his care, their years together, was still standing. Still, the storm last month had left it barely holding up. She couldn't ignore it forever. She'd have to fix it. The thought of doing it alone made her shoulders droop. She wasn't weak. She still took long walks, tended her garden, baked pies that made the whole neighborhood jealous, but her body reminded her daily that she was 64. Her knees ached when she crouched, and her grip wasn't what it used to be, as she stood there debating whether to call a handyman. A sudden voice came from the back door. "Morning, Grandma. You're up already?" Evelyn turned and smiled. "Luke, you scared me, sweetheart." Her grandson stepped inside, tall and lean, his messy brown hair falling into his eyes. 19 years old, full of that restless, good-hearted energy that reminded her so much of George when he was young. Luke was studying mechanical engineering at college, and he'd come to stay for a few days during spring break. He walked over to the window and followed her gaze. "That old fence still giving you trouble?" She nodded. "It's been through a lot. I was just thinking of fixing it before it collapses completely." Luke grinned. "Then I'll help you." "Come on, Grandma. You can't do that alone." Evelyn chuckled softly. "You don't have to, dear. You're on break. You should be resting, hanging out with your friends, not fixing fences for your grandmother." He gave her that half smile that always melted her heart. "Resting is overrated. Besides, I like helping you. You make the best lunch in the world." She laughed, shaking her head. "So it's the sandwiches that motivate you." He winked. "That and your company." Something about the way he said it light, but full of care, filled her chest with a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. A few minutes later, Luke was already outside, rolling up his sleeves and examining the damage. Evelyn followed him with a small basket of tools. She hadn't used most of them in years. "Grandpa's old hammer," she said quietly, handing it to him. "Still works like new." Luke took it gently. "I'll be careful with it. Don't worry." They began working together, side by side. The sound of hammering echoed softly through the garden, blending with the chirping of robins and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Evelyn held the wooden planks steady while Luke nailed them into place. The smell of sawdust filled the air. It was the scent of memory, of George's workshop, of long summer days when love seemed endless as they worked. They talked about Luke's classes, his plans, her garden, and old family stories. Evelyn found herself laughing more than she had in months. Luke had a way of bringing light into quiet spaces. When he joked about how she'd bossed his mom around as a kid, she'd playfully nudged him with her elbow. By late morning, half the fence was repaired. The sun was warmer now, glinting off the fresh nails. Evelyn took a step back to admire their work, wiping her forehead with a gloved hand. "You make it look easy," she said. Luke smiled. "You're doing more than you think, Grandma. You just don't give yourself enough credit." His words made her heart flutter, not in the way of youth and romance, but in the deep, human way of being seen, of realizing that someone noticed her effort, her care, her strength. It had been years since she'd heard such simple kindness. They took a break under the old maple tree near the corner of the yard. Evelyn brought out lemonade and sandwiches, and they sat together on the grass. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, painting their faces in shifting patches of gold. Luke bit into his sandwich and looked around. This place, it's like something out of a storybook. Peaceful, quiet. I get why Mom says she misses it. Evelyn smiled softly. Your mom grew up running around this yard. Your grandpa used to build little toy boats for her to float in that bird bath. We didn't have much, but we had love. That's what made it home. Luke nodded thoughtfully. You two were together a long time, huh? 42 years, she said quietly. Not all easy, but always full of love. Losing him. It's like losing the sound of laughter from a house. The walls stay, but the warmth leaves for a while. Luke was silent for a moment. Then he said gently, he'd be proud of you, Grandma. You kept everything he loved alive. The garden, the house, even this fence. The words hit her like a quiet wave. She turned her face away, blinking quickly. You always were good with words, she said softly. He shrugged with a grin. Guess I learned from you. They worked again in the afternoon. The steady rhythm of hammer and brush filled the yard. Evelyn painted the repaired sections while Luke measured new boards. Her arms ached, but she didn't mind. Every stroke of paint felt like breathing life back into something she thought was gone. As the sun began to dip, the fence stood tall again, fresh, bright, almost new. Evelyn leaned on the gate, her eyes filled with quiet pride. Luke stood beside her, his hands on his hips, smiling at their work. Looks good, doesn't it? He said. She nodded slowly. It's beautiful. You've done your grandfather proud. Luke looked at her then, his expression softening. No, Grandma. We did it. Something in that moment. His voice, his eyes, the golden light on the white fence stirred something deep inside her. It wasn't sadness exactly, but a deep emotion she couldn't quite name. A sense of life circling back, of love being reborn through small acts of care. That evening, as she watched Luke wash up and joke about her ancient tools, Evelyn found herself quietly thankful for this day. The fence had needed fixing, yes, but maybe her heart had too. And without even realizing it, Luke had helped mend that as well, later. As the stars came out and she lay in bed, she thought about the look on his face when he smiled at her, that warm, patient look that reminded her so much of George. She whispered into the quiet room, You'd be proud of him, love. Sighed. The new fence gleamed faintly under the moonlight, strong, straight, and whole again. Just like her heart, finding its way back to peace. And though Evelyn didn't yet know it, tomorrow would bring words from Luke that would touch her even deeper. Words that would change something inside her forever. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen curtains, scattering gold across the countertops. Evelyn was already up, humming softly to herself as she prepared breakfast. She cracked eggs into a bowl, the rhythmic tap echoing gently through the room. The house smelled like coffee and toast. Warm, comforting, familiar. It was the kind of morning that carried a quiet peace. Luke came down the stairs, rubbing his eyes, his hair still tousled from sleep. Morning, Grandma, he said, voice low and groggy. Evelyn smiled. Morning, sweetheart. Breakfast is almost ready. He grinned and slid into a chair at the table. You didn't have to wake up this early. I told you I'd make breakfast today. Oh, please, she said with a small laugh. You think I'd trust you with my kitchen after what happened last time you made pancakes? He chuckled. Okay, fair. But that was years ago. They laughed together, and for a few minutes the house felt alive with the warmth of ordinary conversation. Evelyn served the breakfast, eggs, toast, and orange juice, and sat across from him. Luke ate like someone who hadn't seen a proper home-cooked meal in weeks. And that alone filled her heart with a quiet joy. After breakfast, they stepped outside. The fence stood tall now, gleaming white under the morning sun. Evelyn admired it once again, her hand brushing lightly over the wood. "We did good work yesterday," she said. Luke nodded, stretching his arms. "Yeah, it feels good to fix something with your hands. College life doesn't really give me that kind of satisfaction. It's all laptops and late-night projects." She looked at him thoughtfully. "You miss home, don't you?" He hesitated. "Sometimes. It's strange at school. Everything's loud and busy, but somehow it feels lonelier. Here it's quiet, but it feels alive. I don't know if that makes sense." Evelyn smiled gently. "It makes perfect sense." They decided to spend the rest of the morning cleaning the garden. Evelyn pruned the rose bushes while Luke gathered fallen branches and leaves into piles. They worked easily together, not needing many words. Birds chirped overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of fresh earth. After a while, Luke noticed Evelyn pause and rub her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked, setting down the rake. "Just a bit sore," she admitted. "I guess I'm not as young as I used to be." He walked over and picked up the shears from her hand. "Then take a break. I'll finish this part." Evelyn tried to protest, but the look on his face made her stop. It wasn't just care, it was respect, the kind that comes from love and admiration. She nodded quietly and sat on the bench under the maple tree. Watching him work, the way Luke moved, reminded her again of George, not just in the shape of his shoulders or the tilt of his head, but in the quiet patience he carried. George had always been like that, thoughtful, steady, the kind of man who fixed more than just fences, he fixed hearts. To Dot, as Luke worked, he began to talk, not loudly, but like someone sharing thoughts he hadn't said out loud before. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said, looking up. He kept his eyes on the fence as he spoke. "When Grandpa passed away, how did you keep going? I mean, didn't it feel like everything just stopped?" Evelyn's chest tightened. She took a slow breath. "It did," she said softly. "For a while, it felt like time stood still. The days blurred together. I'd wake up and reach for him before remembering he wasn't there." Luke listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. She continued, her voice steady but low. "But you learn something eventually. Life doesn't stop even when your heart wants it to. You start finding meaning in little things, in making tea, in tending the garden, in helping someone smile again. Grief doesn't go away, but it softens. And love. Love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape." Luke turned to her then, his eyes shining. "That's beautiful, Grandma." She smiled faintly. "It's the truth. Some days I still talk to him. Not out loud, but in my heart. When the wind blows through the garden, I like to think it's him listening." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world felt still, just the two of them, the repaired fence, and the rustling leaves whispering secrets of the past. Then Luke said softly, "You know, Grandma, I think that's why I love being here. You make everything feel real, like it's okay to slow down, to feel things. My friends, they rush through everything. But you notice life." Her throat tightened again. "That's one of the kindest things anyone's ever said to me," she whispered. He smiled, brushing his hands on his jeans. "It's true. You've taught me more in a few days than I've learned in months at school." Evelyn laughed gently, the sound carrying across the garden. "Well, I'm glad I can still teach something at my age." As the afternoon went on, they finished cleaning the yard and moved the old flower pots to the porch. The sun began to lower, painting everything in warm amber light. Evelyn brought out lemonade again, and they sat together on the porch steps. Watching the day fade, Luke sipped his drink, quiet for a while. Then he said, "You know, Grandma, sometimes I worry that I won't find what you and Grandpa had." She turned to him, surprised. "What do you mean?" He stared out at the garden. "Everyone I know seems so disconnected. People talk, but they don't listen. They love, but only when it's easy. You and Grandpa built something real, something that lasted. I don't even know if people love like that anymore." Evelyn looked at him with deep tenderness. "Oh, sweetheart, love hasn't changed. People have. But the right kind of love is still out there. The kind that listens, forgives, and stays. He met her gaze then, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding. Quiet and profound as the sky turned pink, Luke reached over and gently took her hand. "You know what's funny?" he said softly. "You and Grandpa built this fence to keep the garden safe, but I think what you've really built here was a place for hearts to heal." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. His words touched something deep inside her, that place where memory and love lived side by side. "Maybe you're right," she said finally. "Maybe this house has always been more than walls and fences. Maybe it's a reminder that love, real love, never leaves." Luke nodded, his voice low. "It doesn't. It just finds new ways to stay." They sat in silence after that, watching the light fade. The crickets began to sing, and a cool wind swept through the yard. Evelyn could almost hear George's voice in the breeze, calm, reassuring. Proud Luke eventually stood and began stacking the empty lemonade glasses. "I'll take these in," he said. She smiled, her voice warm. "You're too good to me, Luke." He turned back and said softly, "No, Grandma, you're the good one." When he disappeared inside, Evelyn stayed on the porch a little longer, staring at the horizon. The sky was a blend of orange and purple now, and the fence glowed faintly in the fading light. She felt something shift within her, a quiet peace settling where grief used to live. It struck her that maybe the most beautiful moments in life weren't loud or grand. Sometimes they were simple, a kind word, a repaired fence, a hand reaching across time to remind you that you're not alone. When Luke came back out, he sat beside her again. They didn't need to speak. The world around them said enough. The creaking of the porch, the whispering wind, the soft beating of two hearts that understood one another. That night, as Evelyn got ready for bed, she looked out at the garden once more. The moonlight touched every corner, every flower, every piece of that fence they'd rebuilt together. She felt grateful, not just for the help, but for the connection. Because sometimes, love doesn't just come from romance or youth. Sometimes it comes quietly through care, through time, through generations, reminding us that even when everything changes, the heart still remembers how to love. And what Luke would say the next day, those words would take that truth even deeper, leaving Evelyn speechless in the best possible way. The next morning began quietly. Mist lingered over the garden, soft and silver under the rising sun. Evelyn stood at the kitchen window with her cup of tea, watching as the world slowly came alive. The fence they'd repaired stood firm and beautiful, a symbol of both effort and healing. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of completion, as if something heavy inside her had finally settled. Luke came downstairs, dressed in a light jacket, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Evelyn's heart ached a little at the sight. He was leaving today. "You're up early," she said, forcing a small smile. He nodded, rubbing his hands together. "Couldn't sleep much. Wanted to take one last walk before heading back?" Evelyn poured him coffee and slid it across the table. "You've always liked the mornings," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I think I get that from you." They sat together, the house filled with the comforting silence of shared understanding. Outside, birds called through the fog, and somewhere in the distance, a car engine hummed. Evelyn looked at Luke, at his kind eyes, his calm demeanor, and thought how much he had grown. Not just taller, but deeper. There was something in him that carried warmth, the kind that comes from empathy. After breakfast, they stepped outside for that last walk. The grass was still wet from dew, and the air smelled fresh, almost sweet. They walked side by side, their shoes brushing softly against the gravel path. Evelyn's garden had never looked more alive. The roses were blooming again. The lavender swayed gently in the wind, and the repaired fence gleamed like a quiet victory. Luke stopped for a moment near the maple tree. "You know, Grandma," he said, "I didn't realize how much I needed this visit." She looked at him, her expression tender. "I'm glad you came, sweetheart. It's been wonderful having you here." He hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the fence. "When I first arrived, I thought I was just coming to help you with the repairs. But somewhere along the way, it felt like I was fixing more than wood and nails. Evelyn blinked. What do you mean? Luke turned to her fully now, his voice calm but full of emotion. You've always been the strong one in the family, Grandma. Even after Grandpa passed, you held everyone together. But I could see it, the loneliness. The way you still looked out that window every evening like you were waiting for him. Her breath caught. He had noticed. He continued softly. Yesterday, when we fixed that fence. You told me that love doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. I haven't stopped thinking about that. And I realized something. Maybe love also passes on through the people we touch. Evelyn's eyes glistened, her throat tight. What are you trying to say, Luke? He smiled gently, a warmth in his voice that reached straight to her heart. I think Grandpa's love didn't just stay in memories. I think it's still here in the way you smile when the wind blows, in the way you care for everyone, and how you still make this home feel alive. You kept his love breathing, Grandma. You passed it on to me. Tears filled her eyes, uninvited but unstoppable. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the swell of emotion that his words carried. Luke stepped closer. You always say you're proud of me, he said, quietly. But I want you to know I'm proud of you too. You taught me that strength doesn't mean being unshakable. It means feeling everything and still choosing to love through it. Evelyn couldn't speak. The tears rolled down freely now, her heart overflowing with something that was both sadness and comfort at once. He reached out and took her hand. His touch gentle. Grandma, he said softly, you didn't just build a home here. You've built a legacy of kindness, and I promise you I'll carry it forward. That was the moment her composure broke completely. Evelyn turned away, covering her mouth as quiet sobs escaped her. Luke didn't say a word. He simply pulled her into a hug. She leaned into him, letting the tears fall, feeling safe in the warmth of his embrace. It had been years since she'd cried like this, years since. Someone's words had reached the deepest corners of her soul. For a long time, they stood there, grandmother and grandson, two hearts connected by shared love, by memory, by something sacred that time could never erase. When she finally found her voice again, Evelyn whispered, You have no idea what your words mean to me. Luke, for so long I've wondered if I was just holding on to ghosts. But maybe love really does live on. He smiled softly. It does, Grandma. I see it every time you look at the garden. You didn't lose Grandpa. You just carry him differently now. Evelyn nodded, her voice trembling. But sure, you're right. And maybe this garden. Maybe it was never about keeping people in or out. Maybe it was about learning to grow again. They walked the rest of the way quietly, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. When they reached the fence, Evelyn ran her fingers along the smooth wood. Remembering how broken it had looked before Luke came, now it stood tall, strong, beautiful, whole. Promise me something, she said, turning to him. Anything. Whenever you feel lost or like life's moving too fast, come back here. This place will always be your home. He nodded. I promise. The car arrived a short while later. Luke loaded his bag into the trunk and turned to her one last time. You going to be okay? He asked softly. She smiled through her tears. I will be. You've given me something to hold on to. He hugged her again, tighter this time. I love you, Grandma. I love you too, Luke. More than words can say. As the car drove away down the gravel road, Evelyn stood there waving until it disappeared beyond the trees. Then she turned back toward the garden. The morning mist had lifted completely, and sunlight poured through the clouds, bathing everything in gold. She took a deep breath, feeling peace fill her lungs. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. She could almost hear George's voice again, carried softly on the wind, proud, loving, reassuring. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The repaired fence stood in front of her, the garden blooming brighter than ever. She thought about Luke's words about love passing on, about kindness lasting longer than years. She realized then that life was not just about holding on, but also about letting love flow freely from one heart to another. generation to generation. Evelyn smiled to herself. "We did it, George," she whispered into the evening air. "We really did." And though no one was there to answer, she felt it, a quiet warmth brushing her cheek like a soft breeze. She knew she wasn't talking to an empty sky. Somewhere, somehow, love was listening. The garden swayed gently under the twilight, the white fence shining like a promise that healing doesn't come from forgetting, but from remembering with grace. And as night settled in, Evelyn felt something beautiful, a sense that every ending could also be a beginning. Her heart was full. Her eyes were soft. Her spirit was light again. She had mended the fence. But more importantly, she had mended herself.